My heart will go on. You know those words. You've heard them so many times you could sing every note in your sleep. That song, that ship, that door. They didn't just become a movie. They became a shared memory that an entire generation carried without asking to. Titanic was the film that turned a maritime disaster into a cultural weather system. Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet as star-crossed lovers on the most famous vessel in history. They made you fall in love and then ripped it away. But the real story behind the movie, the chaos, the accidents, the decisions that nearly sank it before a single ticket sold, that story is wilder than anything on screen. Because everything you're about to hear actually happened. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts about Titanic that you probably didn't know. Hit that like button and subscribe before we dive in. It genuinely helps the channel. And stay for number 1, because it's the cruelest irony in Hollywood history. The man who carried the entire film on his shoulders didn't get a single thank you from the Academy. Let's get into the countdown with number 15. Number 15. Time magazine told the world. This movie was drowning. Time magazine ran a cover story on Titanic mid-production with a single headline, "Glub, glub, glub." The sound, they helpfully explained, of a big ship going under. That's what the industry thought of James Cameron's $200 million gamble before anyone had seen a frame of it. And honestly, they had reasons. The budget had blown from $110 million to north of $200 million. Cameron had missed his July 4th, 1997 release date by months. A Broadway musical about the Titanic had already opened that same year, and its director was actually apologizing to audiences before preview performances. The consensus was clear. This thing was sinking. Producer John Landau described the atmosphere in his posthumous memoir, The Bigger Picture, excerpted by Variety. At times, it seemed like the whole world was rooting for us to fail. The first real test came at Show West in Las Vegas, a conference for theater owners, the people who would actually decide how many screens to give the film. Landau sat at Paramount's table, nervous. It was the first footage almost anyone outside the production had ever seen. The trailer ended, silence. Then Kurt Russell, attending the same conference for his own Paramount thriller, Breakdown, broke it. "I'd pay $10 just to see that trailer again." The room turned. Cameron got something almost no director had ever received: special dispensation from the Motion Picture Association to release a 4-minute and 2-second trailer, nearly triple the MPA's 150-second limit, to audiences worldwide. Landau wrote that from that day on, every negative article about the film ended with the sentiment that it might actually be good. Number 14. 2 actors said, "No." One said, "I don't read." Before Jack Dawson belonged to Leonardo DiCaprio, he almost belonged to someone else entirely, 2 different someones actually. And the way both auditions collapsed tells you everything about how close this movie came to being a completely different film. First, Matthew McConaughey. By 1996, he was riding high on Dazed and Confused and A Time to Kill. He came in, read with Kate Winslet, and delivered the scene in his full Texas drawl. Producer John Landau later wrote in his memoir, The Bigger Picture, that Winslet was taken with McConaughey, his presence, his charm. The scene landed well. Then Cameron leaned forward. "That's great. Now let's try it a different way, without the accent." McConaughey looked at him and said 5 words. "No, that was pretty good. Thanks," and walked out. 5 words cost him one of the most iconic roles in cinema history. Then DiCaprio came in. He charmed every single person in the office. Cameron recalled in a GQ interview that by the time Leo arrived, every woman in the building had found an excuse to be in the conference room, including the company accountant. But when Cameron set up the camera for a chemistry read and told DiCaprio to run some lines, Leo said flat out, "Oh, I don't read." Cameron shook his hand, thanked him for his time, started toward the door. DiCaprio panicked. "Wait, you mean if I don't read, I just don't get the part?" Cameron said, "Yes," and Leo read. The moment Cameron said action, something shifted. Winslet lit up. Cameron described it later as dark clouds parting and a ray of sun coming through. He called it on the spot. Number 13, DiCaprio, spent the entire shoot trolling everyone. Let's talk about what it actually looked like when Jack and Rose weren't on camera. Because behind the chemistry that made a generation ugly cry was a working relationship that involved, among other things, a 21-year-old Leonardo DiCaprio deliberately farting into his jacket and then sweeping it dramatically across Kate Winslet's face between takes. She howled with laughter, every time. Cameron confirmed it in magazine Rolling Stone in 1998 with a direct quote, "DiCaprio had to wear a long coat for much of the shoot. He would fart in it, and then sweep the coat over her face. If anybody else in the world did that, they'd get slapped." Billy Zane backed him up in the same piece, saying, "Grossing Kate out was purely Leo's job." But here's the part nobody talks about. For months, DiCaprio made a theatrical production out of refusing to get into the water, every single time. Cameron described it to NME. "I always say Leo was like a Siamese cat trying to get into the water. He made a huge production out of getting into the water every time, and it didn't matter. The water could be 80 degrees, and it usually was. Cameron put up with it for the entire 160-day shoot. And then, on the very last day of filming, they needed an underwater scene. DiCaprio looked at Cameron and said, casually, that he was a certified scuba diver the entire time. Cameron told NME, "I wanted to wring his neck. What was all this stuff with the cat and getting into water? Part diva, part clown, part person who spent 6 months pretending to hate water while holding a scuba certification in his back pocket." Number 12. Someone spiked the chowder with PCP. 80 people were hospitalized. August 9th, 1996, Halifax, Nova Scotia. The crew of Titanic sat down to a dinner of clam chowder from craft services. It was, by all accounts, extraordinarily good chowder. People went back for second bowls. Some went back for thirds. Within the hour, all hell broke loose. Around 80 cast and crew members were rushed to Dartmouth General Hospital. Some were laughing uncontrollably. Some couldn't stop shaking. James Cameron himself was affected. Crew member Jake Clark, speaking to Vulture for the film's 25th anniversary, described seeing Cameron wandering the set at 4 in the morning. Eyes beat red, like unbelievably. Bill Paxton was there too. He was, per set decorator Claude Roussel, kind of enjoying the buzz. The grips, meanwhile, were doing wheelies in wheelchairs down the hospital corridor. Doctors confirmed the chowder had been laced with PCP, phencyclidine, also called angel dust, a substance that swings unpredictably between euphoria and paranoia. Cameron told CBC Radio that he'd realized something was wrong when he felt anxious and strange and made himself sick before the worst hit. The prime suspect, according to police records released years later, was a food services worker removed from set a few days earlier for selling substances, but investigators never confirmed it. No charges were ever filed. Number 11, Kate Winslet, refused a wetsuit, got hypothermia, nearly drowned twice. Kate Winslet was 21 years old when she was deep into filming Titanic. Shooting began in mid-1996 when she was 20, and she turned 21 on set. She was also, by every account, absolutely determined not to give James Cameron any reason to think she couldn't handle it. So, when the production offered her a wetsuit for the water scenes, she said no. Cameron had told her he didn't want her costume ballooning in the water. He wanted it to cling. Fine. She'd do it in the costume. For months. She got hypothermia, she chipped a bone in her elbow, slipping on the replica ship's deck. She got the flu. She described having deep bruises running up and down her arms from the constant battering of the hydraulic sets. "I looked like a battered wife," she told the Los Angeles Times in 1997. "I just slipped on the deck." She called the 6-month shoot an ordeal in that same interview. Then she nearly drowned, twice. During the underwater sequences, she was weighted 12 feet below the surface for her close-up shots. Cameron wanted authentic. She gave him authentic. She later said she would not work with Cameron again unless she was paid a lot of money. Not never, just a lot of money. Then for Avatar, The Way of Water. In 2022, she learned to hold her breath for 7.5 minutes underwater and did it anyway. Hypothermia, broken elbow, near drowning, and she went back for more. Some people just can't say no to a good disaster. Number 10, Cameron built a real ship to sink it. Here's something the trailers never told you. Titanic is remembered as a digital effects landmark, The movie that proved computers could do anything. That reputation is almost entirely wrong. In Rosarito Beach, Mexico, Cameron built a near full-scale replica of the RMS Titanic on massive hydraulics that could tilt it, flood it, and physically tear it apart on command. When extras lost their footing on the tilting deck, they were actually falling. When corridors flooded, that was real water slamming into real people at real speed. The grand staircase, the boiler rooms, the first-class suites, built in period-accurate detail, specifically to be destroyed. Cameron refused to fake any of it. Of Titanic's 195-minute running time, only around 2 hours used computer-generated imagery. Everything else was steel, hydraulics, and bodies. When the ship cracked in half on screen, that was actual machinery groaning under its own weight. Stunt performers tumbling down the slanting hull weren't acting a fall. They were taking one. Here's the kicker. The real RMS Titanic cost $7.5 million to build in 1912, roughly $150 million in 1997 dollars. Cameron spent $200 million making his version. The movie cost more to construct than the actual ship it was recreating, and then Cameron sank both of them. One for real in 1912, one on hydraulics in Mexico 85 years later. The result was a disaster sequence that didn't feel like a film effect. It felt like documentary footage of something actually happening, because on some level, it was. Number 9, Cameron admitted. He used the entire movie as a cover story to dive to the wreck. Here's what James Cameron actually told Games Radar during the final months of post-production. "I knew my career was over. I knew we weren't going to make a dime. I knew that we had put a gigantic dent in Fox's treasury, and that I would never be forgiven for the rest of my life." That's the director of Titanic talking about Titanic, while he was still finishing it. Here's the thing you need to understand about Cameron in this film. He had been obsessed with shipwrecks since childhood. Then, in 1992, he saw Titanica, an IMAX documentary shot at the actual wreck site, and the obsession turned into something else. He priced out what it would cost to mount his own private expedition to the North Atlantic, 2.5 miles down. Then he priced out what a Hollywood film about the Titanic would cost. The numbers were surprisingly close. So he pitched Fox, framing it as a spectacle movie, got the budget, and then quietly made 12 dives to the real wreck, each averaging 12 hours inside a cramped submersible in near total darkness at the bottom of the ocean. He told Entertainment Tonight he got approximately 15 minutes of usable footage per dive. What actually made it into the film might be 10 seconds per expedition. He later admitted the movie was partly an elaborate justification to do what he actually wanted, go see the ship. He dove 12 times. He got the movie. Fox got the highest grossing film in history. And the Titanic stayed at the bottom of the North Atlantic either way. Everybody won, except Cameron's nerves. Number 8, the couple in the bed were real. She refused a lifeboat to stay with him. As the ship goes down in Cameron's film, there is a moment that lasts only seconds. An elderly husband and wife lying in bed, holding each other while the water rises around them. No dialogue, no close-up. Just two people choosing not to be separated, even at the end. Cameron didn't invent them. They were Isidore and Ida Strauss, co-owners of Macy's department store, traveling home to New York aboard Titanic's maiden voyage. When the ship struck the iceberg and the lifeboats began filling, Ida almost stepped into Lifeboat 8. Then she changed her mind. She gave her fur coat to her maid, Ellen Bird, who took her place. And then Ida turned back to her husband. Witnesses on the lifeboat heard her exact words. "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." The two were last seen sitting together on deck chairs, arm in arm, as the lifeboats rowed away into the dark. Isidore's body was later recovered from the Atlantic. Ida's was never found. Cameron chose to honor them without commentary. No title card, no explanation. Just that image, two people refusing to be separated, dropped into the middle of the chaos without a word. It lands differently once you know it's real, because that scene isn't a metaphor for Jack and Rose. It's a quiet record of what actually happened. Number 7, Cameron drew the nude sketch himself, left-handed. "Draw me like one of your French girls." You know the line, you know the scene. What you probably don't know is that the hands moving across that paper are not Leonardo DiCaprio's, they're James Cameron's. Cameron had been an artist long before he became a filmmaker. He filled notebooks throughout his early career with drawings of machines, characters, and technical diagrams. For Titanic, every sketch in Jack Dawson's sketchbook was drawn by Cameron himself. But the portrait of Rose needed to be right, so Cameron decided he'd draw it live, on camera, as the scene was filmed. Here's where it gets strange. DiCaprio actually practiced. He spent real time trying to copy Cameron's drawing, well enough to pull it off on film. He couldn't. So Cameron stepped in. But there was a problem. Cameron is left-handed. DiCaprio is right-handed. If the hands in frame appeared to draw the wrong way, the character's dominant hand would be wrong for the shot. Cameron's solution? Draw it left-handed exactly as it appears, then flip the footage in post-production so the hand moves in the direction a right-handed artist would use. The most intimate scene in the film is a sleight of hand drawn backwards by the director, corrected in the editing room. Winslet confirmed all of this in a 2017 interview on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and added that Cameron drew it while she was in a bathing suit, not the gown. The original portrait later sold at auction for around £10,000. Number 6, I'm the King of the World, was not in the script. Cameron invented it. The line is heard around the world. Jack Dawson at the bow of the ship, arms spread, the ocean behind him. One of the most quoted, most parodied moments in 1990s cinema, and it was made up on the spot. Cameron was in a crane basket high above the set, and they were losing the light. They had tried the scene multiple times with different lines. Nothing worked, so he picked up the walkie-talkie and radioed DiCaprio. "All right, I got one for you. Just say, I'm the king of the world. Spread your arms out wide. Be in the moment. Just love it." The walkie-talkie crackled. DiCaprio's voice came back. "What?" Cameron repeated it. "I'm the king of the world, but you've got to sell it." Another pause. "What?" Cameron had run out of patience entirely. "Just sell it." DiCaprio found the line corny. He thought it sounded ridiculous, but he climbed up on the rail, spread his arms, and sold it anyway. Cameron later joked the difference between himself and DiCaprio was that Leo could actually deliver a line like that and make you believe it. Then Cameron stood on the Oscar stage a few months later and shouted, "I'm the king of the world," into a microphone in front of the entire industry. He told Vanity Fair afterward that he understood immediately what had been wrong with that choice. Number 5, Cameron gave up his $8 million fee, then earned $650 million back. By late 1996, Titanic was in real trouble. The budget had blown past $110 million, past $150 million to $200 million. Fox executives begged Cameron to cut an hour from the running time. Cameron refused. "You want to cut my movie? You're going to have to fire me." They didn't fire him, but they needed something. So Cameron made an offer. He surrendered his entire directing and producing fee, $8 million, back to the production. He kept only his $1.5 million screenwriting credit, as reported by Variety. Every dollar of his directing income went back into the film. He gave back his share of the initial gross profits too. Fox's CEO, Peter Chernin, was, at this point, privately budgeting for a $55 million personal loss on the picture. He thought it was going down with the ship. It did not go down with the ship. Titanic opened December 19, 1997. It earned $600 million domestically and $2.2 billion worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing film in history at the time. Cameron's back-end points, protected by surrendering his $8 million fee, generated a payday of approximately $650 million from the original theatrical run alone. Number 4. Cameron put a real Scottish hero on screen as a villain. Then a Fox executive had to fly to Scotland and apologize. James Cameron based his film closely on historical record. Most of the time, that worked in his favor. With First Officer William Murdoch, it did not. In the film, Murdoch, a real officer who served aboard the real Titanic, is shown firing on panicking passengers as the lifeboats fill, and then taking his own life on the deck as the ship goes under. Cameron based the scene on survivor accounts suggesting that officers did fire shots during the chaos, and that at least one senior officer ended his own life. He later said his intention was to show a man of honor, overwhelmed by the weight of the disaster, not a coward. The people of Dalbeattie, Scotland, did not see it that way. Dalbatty is the small Scottish town where William Murdoch grew up. The town had a memorial to Murdoch, honoring him as a dutiful officer who died helping others. When Titanic opened and Dalbeatty watched their local hero portrayed as a man who fired on passengers and took his own life, on the biggest cinema screen in history, seen by hundreds of millions of people, Murdoch's nephew Scott and the entire town were furious. Scott Murdoch went to the BBC to say his uncle didn't end his life, and that the film had tarnished a man who died heroically. The backlash was loud enough that Fox executive Scott Neeson personally flew to Dalbeatty, met with the Murdoch family, and issued a formal apology on behalf of the studio. A check for £5,000 was presented to Dalbeatty High School to boost the school's William Murdoch Memorial Prize. Cameron addressed the controversy on the DVD commentary, standing by the artistic intent while acknowledging the family's pain. The scene itself remained in the film. It's still there. Cameron said years later he wished he hadn't included it. Number 3. There is a real J. Dawson buried in Halifax. Fairview. Lawn Cemetery, Halifax, Nova Scotia. 121 victims of the Titanic disaster are buried there, their headstones arranged in the shape of a ship's prow. Most are simple markers. Most are visited occasionally, quietly, by people who know the history. And then there is one grave that, after December 1997, was never quiet again. The stone reads, J. Dawson. Joseph Dawson was an Irish coal trimmer who shoveled fuel in the ship's boiler rooms. He was a working-class laborer, not a penniless artist from Chippewa Falls. He won nothing in a poker game. He had no sketchbook. He had no rose. James Cameron has said directly that the character's name was not inspired by the grave, that the match is a coincidence. Producer John Landau backed this up. It wasn't until after the movie came out that we found out there was a J. Dawson gravestone. None of that stopped what came next. Within weeks of the film's release, teenage girls were making pilgrimages to Halifax specifically to find that headstone. They left flowers. They left lipstick kisses pressed against the stone. They left handwritten love letters addressed to Jack. They left photographs of Leonardo DiCaprio propped against the marker like offerings at a shrine. The grass around the grave was worn completely away by foot traffic. Joseph Dawson shoveled coal in a boiler room for a living. He never got to see America. He was buried in Halifax in a grave that went largely unvisited for 85 years. Then, a fictional character borrowed his initials and turned his modest headstone into one of the most visited film pilgrimage sites in the world. Cameron says it's a coincidence. The worn grass says something different. Number 2. Céline Dion hated the song. Cameron hated the idea of any song. James Cameron was very clear on one point. His film did not need a pop song. My movie is big enough, he told Billboard. I don't need something bigger. I don't need any singer. He compared ending Titanic with a ballad to putting a song at the end of Schindler's List. He meant it as an insult to the very idea. Composer James Horner disagreed. Quietly, without telling Cameron, he teamed up with lyricist Will Jennings and arranged a meeting with Céline Dion and her husband and manager, René Angélil. Dion's reaction was not enthusiastic. She'd just released soundtrack work for 2 other films and didn't want to become the go-to voice for movie ballads. She also didn't feel well that day. She had stomach cramps. She wanted to go home. Angélil convinced her to try one pass. She was, by her own account, mad. She recorded the demo in a single take, fueled by black coffee, which she later said changed her vibrato. When she turned away from the microphone, everyone in the studio was in tears. The demo went straight to Cameron. He heard it against the film's final images. He reversed course entirely. The song stayed. My Heart Will Go On became the best-selling single of 1998. Over 18 million copies worldwide. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Song, and Dion told Stephen Colbert in 2017 that she had since sung it approximately 3 gazillion times, which is her direct quote. Number 1, Titanic won 11 Oscars. The man who made you care about all of it wasn't nominated for a single one. Here's the irony that still stings more than 25 years later. At the 71st Academy Awards in March 1998, Titanic arrived with 14 nominations, tied with All About Eve for the most in Oscar history at the time. It won 11 of them: Best Picture, Best Director, Cinematography, film editing, art direction, costume design, visual effects, sound editing. Original dramatic score, best original song, 11, tied with Ben-Hur for the most wins in Academy history. James Cameron stood at the podium and shouted, "I'm the king of the world," into a microphone. Kate Winslet was nominated for Best Actress. Gloria Stewart, who played the elderly Rose, was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, making her, at 87, the oldest acting nominee in Oscar history at the time. Both women lost. And Leonardo DiCaprio, who had refused to audition, who had read lines out of spite and turned into Jack the moment Cameron said action, who had made "I'm the king of the world" work when he thought it was ridiculous, who had stood in freezing water and let an entire generation watch him go, was not nominated. Not for Best Actor, not for anything. The film that made DiCaprio the most famous man on the planet won 11 Academy Awards. His name was on 0 of them. He would go on to receive further Oscar nominations in the years that followed, finally winning for The Revenant in 2016, 19 years after Titanic. When he accepted that award, Kate Winslet was in the audience, in tears. She had told reporters before the ceremony that she couldn't imagine not being there, that it might be Leo's year, that he was her closest friend in the world, and she wasn't going to miss it. 11 Oscars. 0 for the man who made you care about all of it. He waited 19 years. She was crying in the audience when it finally happened. And there you have it. 15 weird facts about Titanic. Which one hit you the hardest? Let us know in the comments below. And hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Until next time.